Thank you, listeners, for joining us for today's edition of Elko Live here on KELK Radio. So pleased to feature our guest today from Great Basin College. We're featuring Dr. Ethan Hawkley. Dr. Hawkley has a PhD. He is a social sciences professor, history teacher at Great Basin College here in Elko. And I would love for you to get to introduce yourself, Dr. Hawkley. And thanks again for being on the radio with us today. We're going to talk about some really cool things about the Constitution.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here, Lori. Thanks for having me. Like you said, I teach at the social science department. I teach history there, so I get to teach history classes that cover the Constitution, and sorry, I have some in my throat.
You're okay.
And so.
It is a wonderful responsibility. It can be very inspiring. And you and I talked a little bit. Yeah, grab one of those waters. Those are for you. In that we were a little nervous because the Constitution is front and center these days in our country. But what's nice about today's program, what we have planned out, is we're going to be talking about, and this is the theme that you came up with, Professor, and I really appreciate, this is making peace with the Constitution, which is a wonderful theme. I don't know about you, but it seems like I go a lot of places and I talk to a lot of people who they don't live on social media, where it seems like a lot of the drama is living about what's actually occurring in the country, but there are a lot of people who aren't connected in that way. And so they're almost in disbelief that maybe some serious discussions are happening. So with that in mind, Dr. Hawkley, I want to make sure that you get to disclaim probably the same thing you do with your students when you stand up in front of them the first time.
Yeah, so obviously I don't know everything about the Constitution. I'm not a constitutional scholar or expert. I do teach the Constitution at the college level. We have some good conversations about it in classes. I've been teaching it for many years. So I know more than your average bear, I guess, about the Constitution, but I don't write books about the Constitution or anything. So, with that said, I got a plug. We do have a social science degree at GBC, a BA in social sciences. If you're interested in getting a BA there in social sciences, it leads to all kinds of great opportunities in education and business and counseling and government, but that's not exactly what I'm here to talk about. So my main perspective as a historian who's concerned about the country is kind of the culture war that we all are aware of and that's around us all the time. I think that's, for me at least, the biggest challenge the country faces, because it stops us talking to each other in productive ways. And so when you asked me if I want to come out here and talk about the Constitution, I thought I would kind of address that and talk about some principles of peace that I think are in the Constitution that can help individuals who struggle with this conflict that's raging over every issue all the time obviously on social media, but that certainly bleeds over into everyday interactions among people and their families and homes. So,
And so let's start out with the very basic. We see it on bumper stickers. We see it on trucker hats. It's the phrase, we the people. It's been incorporated and maybe even misused in some conversations. But what does we the people mean?
Yeah, so to me, I think sometimes this we the people phrase gets misused or mishandled in a few ways. So first, I think sometimes people think of themselves as separate from the government. We the people. There's us, there's the people, and then there's the government. But for me, at least, when I read the Constitution, I see that phrase as we the people are creating this government, and that gives us both rights and responsibilities to the government. I mean, to each other and to the government. We're a nation of people. And I think when we just blame the government for everything, then sometimes we push that off of ourselves. And if you blame someone else, then you're saying they need to fix the problem, really. And I think a lot of our problems could be fixed if we, as the people, take a good look at ourselves. So that's kind of one thought. Another thought I often have is that different groups try to claim to represent the people. And the nation is obviously divided between two political parties, and they both claim to speak for the people regularly. And they'll say maybe if they have 51% of an issue, they think that's the people's voice. But if 49% of people in a 350 million person nation disagree with you, I mean, that's still a sizable group of people. It's
that we need to get along with.
Yeah, that we need to get along with. You can't say, well, 51% is going to determine all issues all the time. And it certainly should be done by vote, and I'm not suggesting anything else, but the other 49% certainly should be listened to and be involved in the making of the nation. So, yeah.
And I've often seen that at work close to home, because I tend to remind people, politics are local, for example, and the Constitution being this foundation for all of local government as well. It does make a difference when the people step up to the podium. That's the scary part, right? Sharing your story. It's so much easier to jump on social media or in the olden days, we'd call it gossip, right? You talk over the back fence. And now, we're talking over social media, and, we're, like you said, the government's evil, but we, the people, are virtuous, and our opinions, they matter, and we're right most of the time.
Yeah. Sometimes we think that the people are always virtuous, and I think, the people should be guiding the government. But the people, if you're on social media, you can see the people are not always virtuous in the way they talk to each other, or the way they react to things, or their ideas about things are not always the best ideas. Or it's not about, I guess the point for me is, it's not about pitting the people against the government. It's about helping people understand that you helped to create this government. It's your responsibility. If you want the government changed, you do have avenues to change it that are legal and constitutional avenues to do that, and that you should do that if you're really wanting to engage in the system. Yeah.
And what about how the Constitution is applied to Professor Hawkley? We know, it's old. We've got, 238 years, even though we're coming up on the 250th of our country.
Yeah, it's the longest active Constitution in history, which is, for me as a historian, just something to geek out about. It's just cool that this document can hold together a people for this long, goes through this much change.
It's the envy of other countries. It has been.
It's an incredible document. It's incredible that it's lasted this long, and I think that part of why it does is because it has some solid principles at its core, for all of its problems, and it certainly has had problems over the last several centuries. Like anything, every issue has had everyone has had big problems, and the Constitution is no exception, but the core principles are helpful to people.
So is federalism how the Constitution is applied, Professor Hawkley? Or?
Yeah, so I think federalism is a key principle that a lot of people, I don't know if they always consider when they're talking about how to make change in the system. We're often really focused on national politics, and we're a nation of 350 million people. And so federalism is this idea that the federal government has certain powers, states have their powers, local government has their powers, and they're not supposed to overlap. And that you want to keep a lot of power at the local level, because in Elko, I'm one voice of several thousand people. In the nation, I'm one voice in 350 million people. So if you just like democracy, I like to make my decisions with a few thousand people as opposed to 350 million people if the issue is local. And again, there's this idea of who you blame is who you're asking to solve the problem. So if I'm going to blame the federal government for a problem, I'm asking the federal government to take control of a problem. If I'm going to blame the president for my child's education, then I'm asking the president to take control of my child's education, which I don't really want to do, because or I'm asking 350 million people to take control of my child's education. I'd prefer my local community to have a pretty strong voice in how we're going to deal with our local children, as opposed to whoever's in power. But I think we tend to blame the national government for a lot of things that are not or should not maybe be the national government's responsibility. And but the blame is asking them to take responsibility. So it's not really the government's fault that we blame them and then get mad when they take control over something we blame them about, if that makes sense.
It sounds like we've taken it for granted for, a couple hundred years. We started, having a lot of these problems fairly recently. As you said, the government is cumbersome. There's so much wealth. I think that's also what is mind-numbing for people like me who just can't imagine a country with this much wealth and this much responsibility, how we can have so many social problems, for example. So using the excuse of, well, it's the federal government, when it sounds like what you were saying, Dr. Hawkley, is that go to your child's teacher, then go to your local school board meeting, you go to the principal, right? You start solving problems close to home based on the principles of the Constitution.
Yeah, and there are certainly national problems, and where the federal government should and shouldn't be. That's an individual choice, right? Like, we all don't want the federal government to overstep in principle, but so where are you going to have your conversation about whatever issue you want to have it about is where you think the problem should be solved. And if you're going to do it on a national stage, then you're asking for national intervention into whatever problem you're addressing, which may or may not be appropriate, but it's just something to think about if you're going to push for government solution of some kind.
Right. All politics are local.
Yeah.
Now, something that it has been very meaningful to me in my career, and something now that I'm very confused by what's happening, the separation of powers. We know that we've had this healthy balance of three branches of government, and it made it very clear to me in my role as a journalist or as a broadcaster in this community, who we go to as a people, or I go to as a reporter, in seeking information, in seeking recourse, for example. But something's happened to the three branches. I would assume, Dr. Hawkley.
Yeah, I think so. Another great principle is separation of powers between those three branches. I mean, we all know it's the executive, legislative, and judicial branches. And I think, again, it's kind of my thing. I'm going to just keep hitting on. I blame the people for a lot of things, I guess, and that gives people power, I think. So I like to take blame and give blame to the people. But from my perspective, at least, I think the legislative branch often doesn't solve a lot of the problems it's tasked to solve. So the founders wanted the legislative branch to be the most powerful branch in the government because it's the one that's most directly answerable to the people. But if the legislative branch does not take charge of some issues, those issues must be resolved. And that leaves executive orders or the judicial branch to take actions that, in many cases, I think should be legislative actions. But if the people don't let congressmen and their leaders in Congress compromise and negotiate because they're so polarized into some kind of a war, some culture war, then Congress can't, those congressmen and women are not going to do what they need to do to get problems solved. And I mean, there's a lot of individual issues that people are bickering about and have been bickering about my whole life. I mean, where people divide in their camps and make their arguments, and it's not like those arguments necessarily are terrible arguments. The issue is that the nation's split, and if you're gonna be a congressman or woman, you have to get a broad base of support, and so that means it's very difficult to compromise. And so in some ways, the people are to blame for the fact that government by executive order or judicial review is the default way of doing things sometimes, because on those hot topic issues, the people who are supposed to be dealing with it are answering to us, and we won't let them compromise. I heard recently, I was listening to a congressman speak, and he said something along the lines of, some of this stuff should be dealt with privately, not because we're trying to not be transparent, but because compromises have to be made, and every congressman's reputation can't be on the line every time they make a compromise, because we have to do business, like that Hamilton song, the room where it happened is dark because you have to make deals to make things happen. And, as much, we all hate politicians, but they have to make deals or else nothing happens. So I think knowing that as people can help us as a nation to allow the legislative branch to better do its job.
Thank you for Professor Hawkley from Great Basin College, Dr. Ethan Hawkley. And again, we're talking about the Constitution, trying to make peace with these basic principles. And I was thinking as you were talking about, we the people and trying to push back, and how just unfair things can feel because of this shift in the balance of power, things like gerrymandering. It seems like we're just being ruled almost, if you will, with executive orders. Different judges that seem to sway to one particular power. I mean, there are some serious dangers of executive order. Isn't that correct about a ruling by king?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's the danger if the legislature can't do its job. And I think congressmen should be braver than they are in some cases. I don't like politicians either. I should probably get more slack than I do, I guess. But I think that the two problems you can run into if the legislative branch can't do its job or won't do its job, one is executive orders have to be made, and it's not just this administration is making executive orders. Executive orders have been happening for a long time over some issues, like immigration is going to get kicked back and forth because Congress hasn't solved it. And so executive orders are the only way to deal with an issue that must be dealt with one way or the other. And that means change in policy every few years, which is not healthy for the policy or for relationships with other nations regardless of what your political persuasion is, I don't think rule by executive order is the way to solve that problem. And then it starts to become, and people argue, well, one person has too much power. But from my perspective, at least, it's because Congress isn't taking the power that it should have by making the laws, and the executive is supposed to just enforce the law. Or the other issue is, the Supreme Court is just 9 people, and again, I think there's some hot topic issues that the Supreme Court is asked to resolve that in an ideal situation, the legislature should resolve. But if the legislature can't, then those 9 people have to make a decision, and we can have, some people will say the president's like a king either way if making executive order, or those 9 people are like an oligarchy, or it's like ruled by lawyers as opposed to ruled by the people, and we don't want that either. But again, I think if we look at ourselves as people, then we bear some of the blame for demanding that our representatives never compromise and never try to reach a solution on these problems that will last beyond one administration.
And then if you're looking at, what you were just describing, the dangers of, judicial review, the rule by lawyers, and then we harken back to federalism and that states should have individual rights. For example, Nevada voters will decide whether to enshrine abortion into the Nevada Constitution. We have a national federal ruling, if you will, that is, for many states still unclear. And as you mentioned too, immigration, in regards to the 14th Amendment. Do we just have a hodgepodge of states that have their own rules?
Yeah, well, and that's another. These are fascinating topics for someone who thinks about the Constitution. I mean, I think, and there's really 2 ways to read the Constitution. One is as a constructionist who thinks about what did these framers mean when they wrote it, and I think these are both valid ways. I think that there needs to be a balance, because how people are thinking when they write a law should determine how the law is enacted. Otherwise, the people don't control the law because the people of the time are the ones writing it. At the same time, we have all kinds of new issues. When the 14th Amendment was written, the nation was very different than it is right now, right? But the text of the 14th Amendment is what it is. So you have kind of textualists who want to interpret the law just based entirely on the text, and they might pull away from the initial intent of legislators, and then you have people who are purely, it should be the intent of the original people, or the original framers of whatever amendment is in the Constitution. And for me at least, those are both valid ways of looking at the Constitution. There's no point in saying that one group is evil or incorrect about how they're viewing the Constitution, but you do have to find a balance. I mean, sometimes if the Supreme Court reads something into the Constitution and creates a right, then let's say, for instance, like Roe, for instance, is not very explicit in the Constitution, right? Wasn't. So that meant it was up to 9 people to change it. And that's, if you're gonna try to be an activist through the Supreme Court, then that's what you risk, and that's good or bad for whatever your position might be, but that's the reality of the situation if you rely on the Supreme Court's readings of something like that. But at the same time, the 14th Amendment is pretty explicit that anyone born in the United States is a citizen of the United States. It's in the text. And because the framers didn't anticipate every problem, or the framers of that amendment didn't anticipate every problem that might lead to, does that mean we need to rewrite the exact same text and make it the 28th Amendment? Because it's textually direct and clear. So there's multiple ways to read it and to make arguments. And I think an issue is that we get into as Americans is we often point to the other side as being, crazy, stupid, or evil, instead of just intelligent people who are different than us. And whichever way you're going to read the Constitution is fine. You can be an intelligent person and read it in multiple ways. But to say everyone who doesn't read like you is stupid, crazy, or evil is not a we the people sentiment. We are a people. We are a nation. And we shouldn't think of each other that way. And we need to find ways to manage the different kind of policies we want to have that should run the nation. So.
And at its basic template, it offers something that, and I don't know whether this phrase was around then, that the framers of the Constitution had this exact phrase, Professor, but the words free agency, because certainly not all human beings had free agency under the Constitution, 238 years ago. Women did not, blacks did not, but we have evolved. So what about that idea of free agency? Can't we each just take a breath and take 2 steps back and see that each other has free agency?
To me, that's one of the great things about the Constitution too. If you can survive, the Constitution survives so much social upheaval, and so much change. That's what's That's one of the most remarkable things about it, is that it's a changeable document, so that people who are not initially enfranchised on the Constitution can now enjoy the rights of the Constitution. That's a beautiful thing that allows it to survive and breathe and move forward. But at the same time, I think that we as individuals can look at the Constitution in terms of our own lives and some of the principles it teaches us that are valuable. Like, for instance, free speech. We all want the government to guarantee free speech to everyone, obviously. But are people free to say what they want around me, as a person? Do I really believe in the principle of free speech, or do I shut everyone down around me who doesn't agree with me? And this is kind of just thinking about who's responsible. The people are responsible. If we can't have a conversation about difficult issues, then that's not really the government's fault. We elected the people anyway who are there, so that's also our fault. And to me, that's kind of an empowering thing. It's not just like shame and guilt. Oh, I should feel bad because we elected someone who, whatever you think of whoever's elected. It's about if you take responsibility for the bad, that means you can change it. If you push it off on someone else, you can't change it. That's kind of how I think of it. And so if you want to have a society where everyone is free to speak, then people should feel free to speak around me. And they should feel free to say things, and I'm going to listen and not call them stupid, crazy, or evil. I'm going to listen to them, treat them like intelligent adults, have a give and take conversation with someone that's not going to end in trying to catch them or tell them they're wrong again, or score points on my whatever policy I'm trying to score points on, or bend whatever political issue to my advantage. When we do those things, we're saying individually that we're not in favor of free speech. That the government should be in charge of free speech, make sure everyone say what they want, but I am going to shut people down or vilify or demonize other people. And you can do that. The government can't stop you from doing that. But you're not an advocate of free speech if you silence people in your immediate vicinity from saying what they think. And that's something we as citizens can do to improve the dialogue in the country.
And that's how you can tell if you are uncomfortable with something that somebody may be sharing. You know that you are exercising their right to free speech as well, because you're allowing them a chance to speak about some of those issues. Sounds like what you're saying.
Yeah.
You're just
And I mean, there's levels of, I think, people can try to provoke each other. I mean, there's
and there
politics,
is hate speech.
Yeah, there's hate speech,
because,
and there's
yes,
right, and I
it's still protected.
Absolutely, and
it's not grounds for murder. We know this.
Obviously,
yes,
yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
I mean, violence is not speech. So
thank you.
But it's it's a complicated issue. It can be hard sometimes. I think people try to provoke others in ways that are uncivil, and that's also against free speech. To me at least, if a group of people is peaceably assembling, another group of people is trying to provoke them, then you've got to. It's complex, but I think people should respect each other a little bit more than that sometimes. So.
And there's a note here about that too, Professor Hawkley, is that, when we have these gatherings or counter gatherings, maybe people think, oh, it's okay to get in and antagonize someone, but I wanted to know what you thought about that.
People have the legal right to do that. But because you have the legal right to do something doesn't mean that it's civil behavior in my view.
Mm-hmm. Just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Yeah.
And as the government shouldn't legislate every should. We all believe that as Americans.
We're exhausted by it. Yeah,
exactly. But if we're going to have a society of free speech, then we also have to be civil to each other, and not try to provoke anger, or not try to take offense or provoke anger. Those are two key things that I think can help us, and they're very difficult in tense situations to do for everyone. But yeah.
I also wanted to mention within the category of the First Amendment, again, this contained within the Bill of Rights, which would be another conversation for another day with Professor Hawkley, because those were the amendments when the framers came back and said, "Oh, wait, we missed some stuff. And that's another example of how things can evolve." But in this country, we have fairly recent history of the significance of religious freedom, to be free from persecution, to have room for all different views. And some people feel very strongly believing that there is only one religion reflected in the Constitution.
Right. So, that's kind of the same thing. In your personal interactions with people, are you dismissive of everyone else's beliefs? Are you thinking they're foolish, or they shouldn't vote, or they shouldn't be citizens? I mean, your personal views reflect how much you believe in this constitutional principle. Do you think people should be free to live their religion? Do you think they're crazy, stupid, or evil if they're whatever other religion? Then you might say you believe in the freedom of religion, but in your personal interactions with people, you don't really listen. That's the way to promote freedom of religion, is to listen to other people's religious beliefs. Give them the benefit of the doubt, respect what they think, instead of demonizing or getting involved in something like that.
Maybe it's because the older I get, but the more I look to people around me in my own community, and I believe in leadership. I admire people, or they lead by example. For example, they're because we know democracy is not always that exciting. I've gone to a lot of meetings in my career.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the other thing. I think with democracy, it's exciting to go to a protest or to be a part of a big group, and that's really fun. That's the fun part of democracy, I guess. But the hard part is all the boring parts that really make it function. And I think people overlook their ability to participate in, like running for office or voting. No one likes to stand in line to vote. Offering financial support to a party, or getting involved with a specific group of people who's trying to influence legislation. These are the kind of things I think a lot of Americans don't do a lot of, because they spend a lot more time just shouting at each other. And none of us like going to meetings at work. I mean, I shouldn't say that. I go to work. I like meetings, I guess, but meetings are democratic. That's what democracy is. You go to meetings. Sometimes you talk about things you didn't want to talk about. You have to come to understandings you didn't want to come to. And meetings can be difficult, but democracy works through meetings. And that means it's a little bit slower, but people are being heard, and they're learning to compromise together through these kind of boring democratic processes that, though they could be boring and unexciting, that's really the heart of what makes the nation run and makes things fair and equitable and hopefully peaceful. So
sometimes those meetings and democracy means listening to people that you think I'd rather not listen to, but in all fairness, they might not want to listen to you either.
Right, and they're Americans too, and this is a meeting to try to solve a problem that we have. And if it's a stoplight, it should probably be a local issue. And if it's a war, it should probably be a national issue. You need to make sure, like federalism, it needs to be the people who are around, who are invested trying to solve the problem. So,
Professor Ethan Hawkley from Great Basin College. He teaches history. He's a social sciences professor. There is a fascinating program, a 4-year degree that you can earn at GBC right here in Elko. And I know that you would probably appreciate giving a shout out to your colleagues, Professor. I really appreciate this conversation. I think it was healthy, and I hope it was helpful to some people listening.
Yeah, me too. I really enjoyed it, Lori. Thanks a lot. I mean, we have great faculty at GBC. My colleagues are fantastic. Our program is great in the social science department. You learn a lot about critical thinking, how the world works, in both political science, history, anthropology, and psychology are all kind of part of our program. So you get a really good view of people from a lot of different angles, and it can lead to a lot of great jobs in different places, from government to education to law to counseling to mental health. I mean, just a lot of opportunities there. So thank you for your time, Lori.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor. We're so grateful that you and your wife and your young son make your home here in Elko. We appreciate you very much.
Yeah, shout out to Daniel.
Yes. Thank you, listeners, for joining us for Elko Live today. We appreciate your time.